This hour of the Costa Report is brought to you by IBM. Big data at the speed of business.
Welcome to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and thank you for joining me for another 2 hours of Straight Talk Radio. I want to welcome veterans and members of our armed forces who are joining us over the internet today, as well as listeners tuning in on affiliate radio stations across all 50 states from Maine to Hawaii. Thank you for making us part of your news week. In just a moment, contributing editor for Rolling Stone magazine and best-selling author Matt Taibbi will be joining us to talk about his controversial new book titled I Can't Breathe, A Killing on Bay Street, which chronicles the story of Eric Garner, whose death resulted from a police chokehold and which sparked the Black Lives Matter movement. You'll recall that Garner was arrested for allegedly selling individual cigarettes on the street, and following the police assault was heard repeatedly pleading, I can't breathe. He was offered no CPR by police or EMTs and died en route to the hospital. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide caused by compression of the neck and chest combined with Garner's poor health. And this incident cast a national spotlight on police behavior and attitudes toward black men and led to numerous demonstrations across the country. We're going to hear more about that, as well as changes which have resulted from the Garner tragedy in this next hour. But before Mr. Taibbi joins us, as is my custom every week, let me tell you a little about his background. Matthew Taibbi grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, and he is a graduate of Bard College. Taibbi lived and worked in Russia for more than 6 years, where in 1997 he began co-editing the Moscow newspaper, The Exile, and writing his first book. Taibbi returned to the U.S. in 2002 and founded The Beast. He also started freelancing for The Nation, Playboy, the New York Press, Rolling Stone, and other leading publications. He later joined Rolling Stone as a contributing editor, earning a reputation for his no-holds-barred, tell-it-like-it-is coverage of politics, finance, sports, and controversial social issues. Taibbi is the recipient of the Sydney and National Magazine Awards for his contribution to journalism. In addition to 4 best-selling books, he recently released one of the most telling portraits of the complex realities of racism in America, aptly titled, I Can't Breathe. It's my pleasure to welcome to the Costa Report journalist, best-selling author, and lightning rod for change, Mr. Matthew Taibbi. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Taibbi.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on.
Now, first, tell us what it was about the Eric Garner tragedy that caught your attention, because as you point out in your book, these kinds of incidences are more common than we think. So what was it about this story that stood out?
Well, my previous book had been a little bit about community policing. I had spent about 8 years covering white-collar crime on Wall Street and had become interested in the idea of, certain kinds of people don't go to jail, so who does go to jail in this country and why? So I was interested in the whole phenomenon of how more minor crimes were policed. And when Garner was killed, it was, to me, sort of a textbook example of what can go wrong with a certain kind of policing that we do these days. And after the police officer in the incident was not indicted, I went over to Staten Island and just started talking to people on the street about Garner. And he just seemed like such an interesting, funny character that I decided that I was interested in trying to learn more about him, and from there it evolved into a book project.
Well, I think you brought up the fact that he was kind of an interesting character and well-known in the community. Now, on the day that he died, he wasn't really breaking any laws on that particular day. And just prior to being chokeholded, as I understand it, he had broken up a nearby fight and was a little winded already from breaking that fight up. Was that right?
Yeah, so the series of events that led to his death was very complex, and you're absolutely right. One of the first things I found out when I started looking into this case was that Eric Garner, although that absolutely is what he did for a living, he sold untaxed cigarettes. he wasn't doing that morning. He had some personal issues in the morning that he spent some time talking to people on the street about. Then he felt unwell physically. He was in a bathroom for a while. He got out, and as soon as he got out, that's when that fight you referenced started. He broke up the fight. That was part of his function in the block, actually. He's a very big guy, and he sort of took it upon himself to prevent violence in the park if he could, because it kept police away from the park. Mm-hmm. So he broke up the fight, and he was leaning up against a wall, winded, when he was approached by police. And the reason that they were approaching him and trying to arrest him is somewhat complicated, and is often described in the newspapers as him being arrested for selling cigarettes, but that's actually not what happened. And that's part of the reason why, if you've seen the video, he seems so bewildered about why he's being arrested.
Yes, and he keeps saying, I haven't done anything, and that even seemed to provoke the police even more. And that video, as you point out in your book, was very instrumental in showing what had happened. So what we have here is a black man who is in poor physical health, who's running an illegal business selling individual cigarettes on the street, but happens to be arrested by the police because of his previous reputation for doing it. And he's chokeholded, he's pushed down on the street, and he begins repeatedly saying, I can't breathe. He said it 11 or 12 times before he passed out. So how long did it take before the ambulance arrived, and what shape was Garner in then?
Well, it's a little hard to say exactly whether he was dead already. He was pronounced dead in the ambulance, but there were some people who were witnesses on the scene who claimed that he was already not breathing before they got there. They were
which would explain why the ambulance personnel didn't offer CPR. As I understand it, none of the medical technicians offered any CPR to him, which would indicate he was already dead.
That's right, which is odd. There were actually two different explanations for why he wasn't helped. Initially, he collapsed into a beauty salon, and that's ultimately where his body was sort of half in and half out of a store. And the store owner said to a police officer on the scene, "Why aren't you administering CPR?" And this was very early after the whole fracas concluded. And the answer that he got was, "He's fine," or essentially he's faking it. He's fine. But later, I think when the ambulance finally got there, and they were a little bit late. I think he was on the street and unattended for a good 8-9 minutes, I think. And when they finally got there, they took their time, and I think that was probably because it was already too late at that point.
So the police essentially took his "I can't breathe" as a ruse of some type.
Right. Yes. Exactly.
And yet, here's why I can't buy that. They actually tipped him over on his side. So there must have been something in the police that said he's having trouble. Otherwise, why would they put him on his side? They kind of rolled him on his side, didn't they?
They did, yeah. And also Garner was a known quantity on the street. Everybody knew that he was that he had asthma. That he had health problems, that he had diabetes. It was no secret on the street that he was a bit of a problem. In fact, that might actually have been one of the reasons why he was so repeatedly arrested by police, because he had almost no ability to run away. He very quickly ran out of breath.
Yes, that's right.
So he was this was known to officers, maybe not these officers, but it was known certainly to police in the area.
Yeah, and there's no question his poor health condition did contribute to it. But as I said, the medical examiner did rule this a homicide. Now we have to take our first break, but stay where you are. We'll be right back with more from Matt Taibbi. You're listening to the Costa Report.
Hi, I'm Joan London. If you're worried about your parent or loved one living alone, like I was, and you want reliable senior care information, then call A Place for Mom, the nation's largest senior living referral service.
Finding an apartment that was on the courtyard with the view of the trees, the view of the ducks, the stream, the creek, all of that, that was what I needed.
You'll get free information on assisted living, Alzheimer's care, nursing homes, even important financial information. Here's the number.
To speak with a local senior living advisor, call A Place for Mom at 800-451-2976. That's 800-451-2976.
A Place for Mom is a free service, and you can trust them to help you. So if you're struggling to find reliable senior living information, there's a place for answers, A Place for Mom.
To speak with a local senior living advisor, call A Place for Mom at 800-451-2976. That's 800-451-2976.
Like a lot of women I know, I am a big fan of a clean-shaven man. But not just any shave. It has to be a close, fresh shave. The kind of shave us ladies like to get near. In other words, a hairy shave. 3 million men have switched to Harry's because you can't get a better shave for the price. That's because Harry's razors are shipped from a factory that has been making precision blades for over 100 years direct to you with no middleman. But you don't have to take my word for it. Harry's is so sure you'll never use another razor again, they're offering a trial shave kit for free. The kit includes an ergonomic razor handle, 5 precision blades, shave gel, and a travel blade cover. To get your free trial shaving kit, just go to harrys.com/Costa. That's harrys.com/Costa. And find out why a Harry's razor makes all the difference.
Every day, I wake up at 5 a.m. to give Dad his medicine. Every day, I wake up at 5 a.m. to give Dad his medicine. At 6 a.m., I make his breakfast. Every day, I wake up at 5 a.m. to give Dad his medicine. At 6 a.m., I make his breakfast. At 7 a.m., I shower. Every day, I wake up at 5 a.m. to give Dad his medicine. At 6 a.m., I make his breakfast. At 7 a.m., I shower. I start laundry at 8. At 10, we go for a walk. Every day, I wake up at 5 a.m.
For those dealing with the daily struggles of caring for a loved one, we hear you. That's why AARP created a community with experts and other caregivers for advice, tips, and support. Together, let's help each other better care for ourselves and the ones we love. Visit aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
I am done with my mattress. That's right. I'm not spending another night on this old bag. My new mattress comes today, and this thing is out of here. Bye-bye, mattress.
Yep. Bye-bye, mattress. So says you and about 1,000 other people every day. And that's a lot of old mattresses with no place to go. There's the landfill, of course, where they just take up space. But what a waste. Because you could send it to a mattress recycler, where old mattresses get broken down into steel, foam, wood, and fiber that become new steel, carpet padding, home insulation, garden mulch, biomass fuel, locomotive oil filters, and all kinds of other great stuff. So Bye-Bye Mattress is right. But don't toss it. Recycle it. It's easy. And it's free. To find a mattress recycler in your area, visit buybuymattress.com.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and my guest today is award-winning journalist and author of the riveting book, I Can't Breathe, Mr. Matt Taibbi. Now, tell us a little bit about the 2 police officers involved in the Eric Garner murder. What happened to them?
Well, so far nothing. There's Justin D'Amico, and then the main officer was this guy, Daniel Pantaleo. Pantaleo was the one who administered the apparent chokehold.
Mm-hmm.
And it's complicated to explain because he can't be disciplined by the NYPD until the criminal justice system runs its course. And although he hasn't been indicted by the local district attorney, a grand jury decided not to indict him, there still is the possibility of a federal civil rights prosecution, and that has not been concluded yet. So it's not clear exactly what the outcome of his situation will be, but he's still in the employ of the police and still collecting a salary and on desk duty, and apparently even collected overtime last year.
Is that right? Now, as you point out, this case was presented to a grand jury, and the grand jury chose that actually came forward and said there wasn't evidence to indict. Is that right?
That is right, which is odd on a number of levels.
I don't understand this. Please explain this to us. You have a medical examiner saying it was homicide. So, and yep. You also have a videotape of him dying and saying, "I can't breathe." I'm not understanding how the grand jury concluded that there wasn't enough evidence to indict. Were you able to find anything out about that?
A little bit, yes. I mean, it's a mysterious process. Typically, in New York, every felony has to be handed down by a grand jury. So they have standing grand juries that sit there and they hear many cases a day. So typically what prosecutors will do is they'll come into a grand jury and they'll bring in like 3 pieces of evidence, right? Like there was a stabbing on the corner, here's the knife, here's one witness, and here's a photograph of the suspect fleeing the scene. In this case, what they could have done is cited exactly the evidence that you mentioned. There was the ME's ruling of a homicide, there was the video, and then there was also the fact that the police commissioner himself described what happened as a chokehold, which is a banned procedure, which
and you had a lot of witnesses. I want to point that out too. There were all these witnesses on the street.
Exactly. You could have pulled any one of many, dozens of people in to talk about it. But the main thing, though, of course, is the police commissioner making that admission about it being a chokehold, because that's a prima facie case for something like criminally negligent homicide right there.
Yes.
So if they were doing this normally, they wouldn't convene a special grand jury. They would just bring in those 3 pieces of evidence, and a few hours later, you'd have an indictment, because that's usually how it works. What they did instead is they convened a special grand jury. They spent months considering the case, and they heard from 50 witnesses, many of whom, were experts in police technique. And the strong suspicion is, and I found many, many cases where the same pattern happened in officer-involved deaths and shootings. Long grand jury investigations with multiple witnesses that ended with no indictment, and I think it's a trick that prosecutors employ to pass the buck and avoid indicting in these cases.
And as you point out, this was clearly a case that didn't need a grand jury. So whenever you hear special grand juries being convened, I guess everybody's suspicions ought to go up. It almost seems like a way to just delay the process, and eventually nothing happens. Now, you say the officers are still working for the police department today, but they're on desk duty. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
And Garner's family did file a civil suit, as I understand it, and they received a settlement.
They did. They received $5.9 million, which is no small piece of change. But
actually, I think their attorneys received most of that. that's right. Another way that institutionalized poverty is perpetuated, right? The attorneys that represent them usually collect most of those large settlements.
That's absolutely true, and the system is really designed to really only do one of two things in the cases of police violence. They either pay money or they don't. I mean, that's the only thing that really ever happens in these cases. And even when there's a considerable settlement, or if you have an officer who's been involved in multiple cases and lawsuits where the city has lost money, there's no communication that goes back and forth between the corporation counsel's office and the precinct. So your captain often doesn't even know that he has an officer on his squad who's cost the city millions of dollars. So there's very little consequence that actually happens except taxpayer money going out or not going out.
Well, you point out that the communication is really broken. As I understand it, there had been numerous previous complaints of unnecessary violence filed against Pantaleo, Officer Pantaleo.
Yes, there had, and the only way we know that is because it was leaked by the Civilian Complaint Review Board. And this is another really bizarre aspect to all this that I didn't know going into this process. It's basically impossible to find out anything about the history of any individual police officer. There's actually a law in New York, and there are many similar laws across the country that have the same concept. But basically what it says is any information that is relevant to the evaluation of the performance of a police officer is confidential. So no matter what your situation, whether you're suing because somebody died or whether you're a defendant in a criminal case, you can't find out the history of a police officer and whether or not that person has a lot of abuse complaints. It's just not public.
And there were abuse complaints against Pantaleo, who administered the chokehold.
Yes, there were 14 different complaints, 6 of which were substantiated by the city. Additionally, there were 2 lawsuits where the city settled, and they were bad ones too.
And this was a guy with a track record, and no one in the police department was going to stop him.
Right, and this is kind of the pattern of a lot of these cases. I mean, if you've seen Catherine Bigelow's Detroit, it's not so much about the problem cop, although there often is a character like this in these tragedies. It's much more about the surrounding bureaucracy that kind of turns its head and doesn't do anything about him over the years.
Right.
And
it's the enablers.
So you have,
right.
It's the enablers, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so Pantaleo, if you talk to other cops, they will say to you, look, there's a way to handle things in the street and there's a way not to handle things on the street, and this is a guy who just didn't get it, and yet nothing was done, and that's the real problem.
Yeah, that is the real tragedy, that, there were so many prior complaints, and this is a systemic problem within the police department, that these guys that have numerous violence complaints against them, nothing is done until we face a tragedy like this, a death like this. And we have to take another short intermission, but stay with us. We'll be back after these important messages from today's sponsors. You're listening to the Costa Report. I'm here today with Scott Caraccioli of Caraccioli Cellars. Scott, we keep hearing about the wines that are being developed in Monterey County. How would you describe the climate conditions for grapes?
Monterey County has a lot of little pockets that give you the opportunity to grow a variety of grapes. It comes down to the match of location and climate with the varietal that you're going to grow. And where we grow in the Highlands, it's prototypical cool climate. We're even in the northern side of the Highlands. So that is ideal for both Pinot and Chardonnay. Chardonnay strives really well in a lot of our county, as well as Pinot, but I would say that this is the most optimal location. You get wind, you get sun exposure. The benches come off of the inland side of the coastal mountains. It's an optimal position. You can order any of our products directly from us by visiting our website, caracciolicellars.com, or calling the tasting room directly, 831-622-7722.
I'm Paul George of the Indiana Pacers. When I was 6, I had one thing on my mind. When I was 6, my days were spent playing basketball every chance I could. When I was 6, my dream was to make it to the NBA. When I was 6, my mom had a stroke. So I want you to learn the signs of a stroke fast. F-A-S-T. F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. S, speech difficulty. T, time to call 911. Because the sooner they get to the hospital, the sooner they'll get treatment. and that can make a remarkable difference in their recovery. I'm Paul George. Protect the ones you love. Spot a stroke F-A-S-T. Fast. Life is why. Visit strokeassociation.org. Brought to you by the American Stroke Association and the Ad Council.
Women now make up 37% of the workforce, changing their role forever.
Harvard Medical School has now opened its doors to new female applicants.
The first woman is now in space.
The majority of last year's doctorate degrees were earned by women.
We've come so far, but our news is changing for the worse. More women die from heart disease and stroke than men, even though it can be prevented. Make a change at GoRedForWomen.org today. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the American Heart Association's Go Red for Women.
Okay, what are you wearing right now?
Nothing.
That's right. So Mommy's going to teach you how to dress yourself. Underwear always comes first, name tag at the back, then pants, then shirt. Get the first button in the right hole or you have to start all over. Socks going first, then shoes, right on right, left on left. With shoelaces, just take the ends, cross them over, switch the loops, the rabbit goes down the hole, pull tight, and you're left with bunny ears. Got it? Why are your pants on your head?
Most parenting is hard to do in just 2 minutes. But 2 minutes twice a day making sure they brush their teeth is easier, and it could help save them from a lifetime of tooth pain. Visit 2min2x.org to find out more. A message from the Partnership for Healthy Mouths, Healthy Lives, and the Ad Council.
Yeah, it's me, your heart. Listen to me. We've got to talk. High blood pressure is serious, and yours? Whoa. What happened to us? We used to be so much more active. But lately you've been ignoring me. I know you think I'm just gonna keep ticking away forever, but you're wrong. You can do so much more to control your high blood pressure. Doing the minimum isn't doing enough. I'm under a lot of pressure and can quit whenever I want. Bet you didn't know that. But I like my job. Just treat me better. Check on me. Give me something green to nibble on every once in a while. And maybe we can do some exercise on occasion. Let's get to it. After all, we're in this together.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you. High blood pressure can lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get your blood pressure to a healthy range before it's too late. Find out how at heart.org/blood pressure. Check, change, control. A message from the American Heart Association, the American Stroke Association, and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and if you're just joining us, my guest today is Matt Taibbi, author of I Can't Breathe. Now, one of the outcomes of the murder of Eric Garner was the Black Lives Matter movement. Can you speak to that for just a moment?
It pre-existed Garner a little bit. It had actually grown out of the Trayvon Martin incident, but it was significantly reignited by this case and by Ferguson, which happened right after Garner's murder. I think those two incidents were really the triggers that made Black Lives Matter a national movement and put it in the spotlight across the country. They were very heavily present in the citywide protests that kind of took over New York in the wake of the non-indictment of the police officers in December. Garner's death was really a crucial moment in the history of that movement for sure.
I think it's important to point out that this is just not a matter of Garner's death. 1 month after Garner, we had an officer killing Michael Brown, and then weeks later, a Cleveland police officer shot Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old. And a few months later, Freddie Gray died in police custody in Baltimore. And these are just the incidences we know about.
Right, yeah, and that's one of the reasons I actually started the book with a story of somebody else who got beaten up in Staten Island and actually had his leg broken in 3 places. The far more common outcome to what they call problematic arrests in these police forces is the person doesn't die. It's the thousands of unnecessary stops, the profiling, the incidences that stop just short of deadly violence. There are so many of those incidents that it's impossible to catalog, and the Garner and Brown and Freddie Gray incidents are actually sort of like outliers that just happen to be useful in calling attention to this issue. But I think that's what's part of the frustration of the black community is that, if you listen to conservative radio, what you hear all the time is, oh, these things don't happen that often. Well, what happens a lot is people get pulled over for no reason and hassled for no reason, and it's a much bigger problem than people think.
Now, along those lines, you talk about this broken window strategy of law enforcement. So tell our audience today, what is the broken window strategy, and does it work?
So broken windows grew out of a theory that was espoused by a couple of social scientists in the 70s. And the concept of it actually on the surface seems to make a lot of sense. The idea is if you crack down heavily on minor crimes like jumping turnstiles or riding bicycles the wrong way down a sidewalk or drinking out of an open container, public urination, you'll achieve two things. Number one, you'll discourage people from going outside with a gun in their pocket because they won't want to be pulled over for something stupid. And number two, you'll gather a lot of intelligence about people because you'll get to stop lots of people and ask who their associates are and learn a lot about what's going on in your neighborhood. The problem with this strategy is that it requires an enormous volume of stops in order to affect all of these summonses and arrests for minor incidents. And when statistics, when people took a look at it, they found out that 85 to 90% of the stops were taking place in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. So it's an idea that in principle sounds interesting, but it's very unequally applied.
And was this broken windows strategy applied to the area where Eric Garner was doing business and living?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And there's an interesting distinction with this policy, which is that if and there's no way to quantify this, at least not that I've been able to find by any study, but if you talk to people anecdotally on the street, what they'll tell you is your likelihood of being pulled over or stopped or frisked is very, very high in certain particular areas and cities, and and the most perilous areas are on the borders of neighborhoods. So in other words, if you're going from Harlem to the Upper West Side, if you're going from a black neighborhood to a white neighborhood, it's that border area, that's the place that's the most heavily policed. And so Garner was actually sort of resting the place where he set up was sort of on the edge of a black neighborhood and an upscale white condominium complex, and that's one of the reasons why he was sort of in the strike zone of a lot of this police activity.
Exactly. He was trying to sort of move out of the areas that get targeted regularly. You can hardly blame him. He was he might have been slow, but he was a pretty smart fellow. What I appreciated so much about the research that you did on this book is that you delve into many, many complex factors which led up to Garner's death, and you trace the story backwards, and we can see that institutionalized poverty plays a big role in these kinds of tragedies.
Yeah, I kind of tried to take this case that everybody had heard of, everybody had seen the video, but treat it almost like a murder mystery. I mean, there's a moment in the video where everything's fine, and then all of a sudden the officer reaches out to grab Eric Garner, and everything goes haywire from there. Well, what are the factors that go into that moment? Like, what's the legal basis that allows the officer to make that physical contact? What's the policing strategy that tells him he has to do that? What's the internal bureaucratic imperative that tells him that he can't just ask Garner to move, that he has to get him arrested? It almost ends up being like Murder in the Orient Express, where there are multiple factors, that are all kind of putting the knife in simultaneously. And historical factors as well, like the use of these very aggressive policing strategies that we've had in this country since before the Civil War, and all of that played a role, and that's what I was trying to show in the book.
Well, for people who have not seen the video, it's very clear because it's all documented. It's very clear that he's not attempting to run or fight the police or anything. You just suddenly see that they're grabbing him, and he's standing relatively still, and that is just it's just shocking because you think, well, what is provoking them, and why do they feel they have a right to chokehold him and throw him down on the ground? It's a quite. I think the video kind of tells the whole story of what happened.
Yeah, absolutely, and for me, I actually purposely didn't watch the whole video until I had to sit down and write that chapter.
That was probably a good idea. That was probably a smart idea.
Yeah, because I didn't want to, have thoughts about it until I had to get there. But one of the things that for me that was so striking was I had spent so many years writing about characters on Wall Street who had been involved in schemes,
in real crimes, in
real
actual crimes,
billions of dollars were
never
involved,
went to jail.
Not even to jail. They never even went into a courtroom, and you would never have imagined a law enforcement officer laying their hands on somebody like that. It's very, very rare for something like that to happen. And yet, in this case, what we're talking about was a sub-misdemeanor where the product in question cost 50 cents. It was a single cigarette, and they applied deadly force. So it's a mindset that is so different, and it's entirely psychological. It's all about a certain kind of victim being deserving and another one not being.
Yes.
And that's what I was trying to get to.
Yes. Well, I wish they would have tried those chokeholds out on some of those Wall Street brokers that bilked people out of their lifetime savings and pension. We have to take another short intermission to hear from some important announcements from our sponsors today. Stay with us. You're listening to the Costa Report.
Are you struggling with addiction or alcohol problems? If you're depressed, drinking, and using drugs, you may need help. And the Affordable Care Act guarantees coverage of substance abuse.
I knew I could get myself out of this. I just needed some hope and some help.
I took the first step to recovery when I made the call.
Call the Addiction, Hope, and Helpline now for a free assessment with someone who cares. Call 800-962-6969. 800-962-6969.
I feel like I'm losing control. I'm afraid I'll lose my job or even my family.
Call now for hope and help with proven, gentle recovery programs.
I never thought that I could be somebody who didn't drink and use drugs.
I'm in recovery, getting the help I need.
Call the Addiction, Hope, and Helpline now for a free assessment with someone who cares. Call 800-962-6969. 800-962-6969. 800-962-6969.
Hi, I'm Joan London. If you're worried about your parent or loved one living alone, like I was, and you want reliable senior care information, then call A Place for Mom, the nation's largest senior living referral service.
Finding an apartment that was on the courtyard with the view of the trees, the view of the ducks, the stream, the creek, all of that, that was what I needed.
You'll get free information on assisted living, Alzheimer's care, nursing homes, even important financial information. Here's the number.
To speak with a local senior living advisor, call A Place for Mom at 800-451-2976. That's 800-451-2976.
A Place for Mom is a free service, and you can trust them to help you. So if you're struggling to find reliable senior living information, there's a place for answers, A Place for Mom.
To speak with a local senior living advisor, call A Place for Mom at 800-451-2976. That's 800-451-2976.
It may be hard to believe, but people just like you are already saving money. FeedThePig.org makes it easy. Their simple savings plan teaches you how to start saving without going overboard. So you don't need to mooch off your friends.
You gonna finish that grape?
You mean the one in my mouth? You don't need to stop buying the necessities.
What you're smelling is a natural musk.
Ew.
You don't need to be a medical test subject.
How do you feel? Mostly okay. Sometimes, though.
You don't need to get a second job as a stuntman.
We need a new stuntman. Let's break for lunch.
You just need an internet connection. Don't get left behind. Start your personal savings plan with the tips and tools on feedthepig.org. That way, you don't need to sell your soul to the devil.
$15 is the best I can do.
All right, deal. Brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs and the Ad Council.
Hey, America. We need to have a little talk. I don't know if you've noticed, but we got a lot of food in this country. A lot of peaches, a lot of corn, a lot of apples, a lot of everything. We've got so much food that we can't even eat it all. So if we got all this extra food, how are 17 million kids in America struggling with hunger? I just don't get it. That's why the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks gathers surplus food and gets it to the hungry kids who need it. They can get you food even if you live in Idaho or Alaska or somewhere crazy like that. This isn't complicated. We got extra food and we've got hungry kids. Feeding America's done the math. Now it's your turn. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org. I know you got internet on your phone, so what are you waiting for? We can't do it without your help. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and if you're just joining the program, my guest today is best-selling author and contributing editor for Rolling Stone magazine, Matt Taibbi, and we've been talking about his latest book, which is a real page-turner. I highly recommend it. It's titled I Can't Breathe. Now, as you pointed out, Mr. Taibbi, we've had a number of demonstrations around the country, the Black Lives Matter movement, widespread media exposure of these problems, and also your book. So tell me, give it to me straight. What has changed since these incidences?
I think there's more awareness of the problem than there was before. There are more journalists on this case and on this topic than there ever have been before. A classic example of something that happened because of heightened awareness that wouldn't have happened before was the case of Laquan McDonald in Chicago, where a series of journalists filed a Freedom of Information request and found video of this horrific police killing. There's pressure in this area toward reform that there hasn't been previously, and also I think there's recognition, especially in white communities, that this problem exists at a level that there wasn't before because you couldn't see it. It was never on video the way it is now.
But how about something like the broken windows strategy? Do you feel that has changed?
Well, I mean, we've had some court rulings where things like stop and frisk have been rolled back nominally, but anecdotally, it's the same pretty much everywhere from what I hear in New York, and officially in cities like Chicago, these practices are still going on, and it's this whole idea of statistics-based policing. Like let's see how many people we can pull over, how many people we can summons, how many people we can bust for minor crimes. That's pretty much de rigueur for major cities in America, and that unfortunately has not changed.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've talked about, the fact that the broken windows strategy hasn't quite changed as people are still being pulled over based on race and so on and so forth. And the fact that institutionalized poverty plays a big role in the kind of justice that you can get in the United States. I have to ask you, after doing all of this research, did you come away with any conclusions on how you would fix it? Where would you start?
I would start with going after that policy, the broken windows policy, because taking on the problem of racism, that's a big, thorny, metaphysical, difficult issue. But in terms of immediate solutions and steps that you can take policy-wise, this is an area where there's some agreement between both the right and the left, where even if you talk to a lot of cops, they say, this isn't what I want to be doing. I don't want to be rolling drunks in alleys. I want to be going after, drug kingpins and that sort of thing. So I think going after that policy and reducing the number of contacts between police and citizens in big cities, that would have a big beneficial impact.
Right. So you would suggest that they focus on the really big cases, the most dangerous cases, and stop making thousands and thousands of stops and arrests of minor problems like jaywalking and, selling loosies, single cigarettes.
Exactly.
Who cares about the single cigarettes? I don't get this. Am I missing something? I know the whole thing is to go over to Virginia where there's no tax on cigarettes, bring cartons over, and then take them apart and sell singles to people. But I just don't get where that's even worth handcuffing somebody and calling an ambulance for them. And I mean, just the time and the resources to get somebody like that. I don't know. Something's not computing for me.
Yeah, no, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's based on this research that people have done. That the root concept of it is people feel better, they feel safer if things. If
we're arresting people for selling single cigarettes on the street, really?
Well, no, I mean clearly there's a flaw in the logic there, but that's what the idea is. But unfortunately, what it's morphed into is this campaign of sort of mass harassment, and there's lots and lots of violence, and if you go to these sort of minor misdemeanor courts in cities like New York or Chicago, you'll see one person after another, and they're all black and Hispanic, basically, saying that they're being busted for $150 tickets for riding a bike the wrong way down a sidewalk. I mean, do we really have to be doing that? I mean, it seems like there might be a better way to be using law enforcement resources.
Yeah, but I understand what you mean about people like to see the police out and about doing something, and it probably emotionally makes them feel better, but logically it just doesn't compute. I used to be a volunteer for the American Red Cross, and in the middle of these disasters, they would send us to these rich neighborhoods, with our trucks of stew and canned milk. And of course, nobody would come out. We'd say, why do we have to go to these wealthy neighborhoods? They all evacuated, months ago. And they'd say, well, because they need to see that they're the people that donate to the Red Cross, and they need to see trucks around.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
it's the same kind of mentality. Makes no sense. We're there to service people who can't get out and who are stuck and who have lost their homes. But we had to drive our trucks around the neighborhood with big, PA systems saying, we've got stew and canned milk here. And they were all gone. They had all evacuated on their private jets. I found that very interesting. Now, I have one other question for you, and that is that given what you know about what happened to Eric Garner and others, is there anything at all that a person that is caught in a similar situation can do to save their own life?
Well, obviously, the maxim does hold true that if you have an unstable police officer, you probably should just do what he says. That's the strategy the people on the street take.
Don't show any resistance, just fully cooperate.
Yeah, I mean, even though your instincts might be to say something, that's gonna come back to you on the street. And I ran into people who had encountered Pantaleo before on the streets and had gotten a bad vibe from him. I talked to one man who had been with his son when he ran into Pantaleo and had to tell his son to kind of keep quiet about something. So, look, I'm a white guy who doesn't live in that kind of neighborhood. I couldn't possibly advise, but from anecdotally, what people would say to me is you have to learn how to separate the unstable officers from the stable ones, and the same thing goes true in the other direction. That's what experienced police officers told me too. Like, there's a time when you got to be hard, and there's a time when you got to use talking, and this is something that you learn when you're good at your job, and I think it goes both ways.
Right, and above all, you just don't want to provoke.
Right.
And in this particular case, I'm sorry, I did see the video. I watched it many times. I just didn't see the provocation. I didn't see any provocation or any cause there. And I found that particularly disturbing in this case. I can't speak to the other cases that we talked about today, but in that particular case, I just didn't see it. Now, the book is titled I Can't Breathe, and I confess to you, there were parts of this book where I stopped breathing. So well written, and I do recommend it to our listeners today. That is all the time that we have left. But before we say goodbye, let me thank you for researching and writing this incredibly important book and for making time to speak with us today. Thank you, Mr. Taibbi.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Rebecca. I really appreciate it.
And that is it for this first hour. If your station is leaving us after hour one, you should mark your calendars right now. My guest next week is former U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security and Governor and Attorney General of Arizona, who presently serves as the president of the University of California system. I have been trying to get her on my program for over a year. Janet Napolitano will be in the house. Don't miss Janet Napolitano next week, right here on the only program that puts policy ahead of politics. Now stay tuned for a second hour of the Costa Report. Listen up, because I want to let you in on a little secret. You don't have to be a psychic to know which business and political experts are going to be on the Costa Report next month. All you have to do is sign up for our free monthly newsletter at RebeccaCosta.com. It takes less than a minute, and when you do, you'll receive our guest schedule along with special announcements and free offers the first of every month. So go to RebeccaCosta.com and sign up today.
Yesterday, I got a call from the IRS. They say I owe them over $16,000. I don't have that kind of money.
Don't try to fight the IRS on your own. Use Coast One Financial Group and let them help you get a fresh start. If you owe at least $10,000 in back taxes, call now for a free and confidential tax debt analysis. Call Coast One now for a free consultation at 800-643-4661 now. 800-643-4661. That's 800-643-4661.
Unexpected reactions to smart financial decisions brought to you by feedthepig.org.
Well, I finally did it. I improved my credit score.
You're kidding, right?
No.
How are we supposed to be the bad boys of electro-synth pop if you're out there being responsible? The band is about to be discovered. This is our year.
Yeah, you've been saying that for a while now.
You think anyone in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was worried about their credit score?
I never really thought that.
Of course they weren't. Rock stars aren't supposed to think about that kind of stuff. We're supposed to think about how many guitars we've smashed, write aggressively sensitive power ballads, start questionable fashion trends, tragically break up and blame creative differences.
All right. I thought maybe it was time to take control of my finances, Start using a budget, get out of debt, set some goals.
A budget? Debt? Set some goals? Listen, I knew that we'd have our creative differences, but I was hoping they'd involve a little more scandal.
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs and the Ad Council.
The Costa Report is now heard in all 50 states on fine radio stations, including this one.